Hey guys, welcome back. We have a special guest. It's Nadia Pateguana, and nice to meet you. I'm glad that you're here. You're a naturopathic doctor, right?
That's right. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, absolutely. The reason I wanted to bring you on is two reasons. One is that you are going to be one of our special guests at the upcoming summit, which I'm really excited to have you attend. And you have a lot of great experience in keto and intermittent fasting and polycystic ovarian syndrome. Actually, you work with Dr. Fung, right?
That's
Jason
right.
Fung?
And Megan Ramos, yeah, that's right.
That is awesome. Well, welcome. You're right now living off the coast of Africa, right?
No, I'm from the coast of Africa, but
Um,
I'm living in Portugal. So
okay,
yeah, I
good.
love to travel.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. And so what's it like in your country? I've never been there. What's the food like? Um,
That's a great question. So I'm from a country called Mozambique, which, as you said, is on the coast. It's on the east coast of Africa. It used to be a Portuguese colony, so there's a connection between Mozambique and Portugal. That's why I'm in Portugal right now because I speak Portuguese. And so Mozambique isn't on this. It's right on the border with South Africa, so it has a lot of influences. It had food-wise, three major influences. Obviously, the African influence all around. Um, the Portuguese were in Mozambique for 500 years,
mhm.
and Indian, because there's a very large Indian community. Pakistani, I guess, that part of India, but back in the day, it was when they came from India, it was India. And so that's what the food is like. It's a mix of Portuguese, which basically it's a kind of food that has a lot of pork, a lot of seafood, a lot of olive oil. That's the Portuguese type of Mediterranean type of cooking, mixed with very spicy food, like Indian spicy food. And then African food, at least in our country, it's a peanut-based type of curry sauces. That's what
Mm.
Mozambican food is like, with a lot
You're
of
make,
green.
you're getting me hungry. This just
I
sounds
know.
really good. Sounds amazing. So compared to American foods, I'm sure it's healthier, I would imagine.
Well, it used to be. I think, which is part of my journey, my professional journey. I grew up in Canada, so I'm from this
Mm.
lovely tropical exotic country, but I grew up in Canada. So I only went to live in. I left Mozambique when I was 1. So I only went to live in Mozambique when I was 25, turning 26, when I finished naturopathic college. As soon as I finished my board exams, I was dying to go back to my home country. Really, because I thought I was going to do all these great, wonderful humanitarian things, which is a very North American kid type of mentality, to be totally honest.
Mhm.
And then when I got there, I realized that that wasn't really going to be the case. And so I started working against my will, but that was the only thing that was available to me then. I started working as a nutritionist, dietitian. And what did I learn? I learned that the people in my city, of course, cities are very different than the countryside, but in my city were very much exposed to the Western style diet. So right now, the diet in Mozambique is very much um, KFC, Coca-Cola, pizza, and that kind of diet. Of course, they still have their traditional dishes, but the funny thing is, we only eat these traditional, healthier dishes on holidays. It's much more of a holiday type food.
Wow.
During the week, people tend to eat a very Western based type of diet, in my opinion.
Mm.
And so the people that I was seeing in clinic, and that's why I had to kind of learn this because I wasn't taught this in school, was how to treat metabolic syndrome. I was seeing people that were obese, diabetic, with cardiovascular disease, and eventually just by luck stumbled across sort of fertility struggles and got into that because of my own personal journey. But really, the diet was wonderful. Culturally, it's a wonderful diet, but it's been like every other country, it's been very influenced by globalization and the Western culture.
Yeah. Oh, hey, I know that I'm from the Midwest, and this is what we were raised on. I didn't have a chance to even start in a nice, good, healthy country, but you had infertility issues, and then when did you just stumble on some things that just turned things around for you?
Well, actually, because like I said, because I didn't really, I wasn't taught in naturopathic college, just like,
Yeah.
although it's different than medical doctors, right? Or the
Mhm.
instruction, education at the naturopathic college is very much geared towards natural therapies and acupuncture and homeopathy. And of course, we do all the medical sciences, and we do have nutrition, probably more than medical doctors, but it's not just like you probably got in school, for your whole 3 hours. I got a little bit more than 3 hours, a lot more, but it still wasn't the way that we're hoping today that people are going to learn nutrition. So it was very much like, this food has this vitamin and that food has this. And so when I went to Mozambique and people wanted help to lose weight, I had to make it up. I didn't have
Mhm.
any base to go on.
Yeah.
And so, I was given, everybody at the beginning, the very same eat less, move more whole grains, sort of. I really was, until I started to figure out, okay, this is not going to work. And then I had some bases at the naturopathic college. We did talk about gluten, and so I started to remove some grains, and eventually I started to make up my own plans based on just trial and error. And
Hmm.
at some point, very early on in my journey, I would say within the first year or two, I've been a naturopath for 15 years now. So right at the very beginning, I had this person get pregnant accidentally, quote unquote. And that's when I started to realize that there was something there, way before I started trying to get pregnant. And their story was very interesting because it was it was a South African couple that had been married for 13 years. And 6 or 7 years into their marriage, after many IVF, it's funny because South Africa is a very big IVF medical community. They have I have family members that have gone through it, very successful. They're very good at it. I'm not sure why, but that's just an aside. So this couple had tried IVF numerous times unsuccessfully, and they adopted a little girl. So by the time they came to see me in Mozambique, they were living in Mozambique at the time, their daughter was already 6 or 7. So anyway, they've been married for about 13 years, and she'd never gotten pregnant with IVF and whatnot. Then she did my diet, which was a detox. It was a very low carb diet. I mean, at that point, I'd already figured out that in order to help people lose weight, I had to go low carb. I figured that move more, eat less thing wasn't working. That I
Hmm.
figured right away, but I had to call it a detox. So what
Hmm.
I would do is I would throw in this detox once a month, and then the rest of the month they were eating healthy carbs. And then,
Right.
and I was doing this carb cycling thing with them. So that was, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And then 3 months later, this woman and her husband come to my office, and the husband is the one that's wanting to know what's going on. How is my wife pregnant? It's been 13 years. We've done IVF. We've done, what happened here? And I didn't know, nor was that the intent. She just wanted to lose weight. So that was my first, and that of course stayed in my mind. And then it started to happen more and more often, and then it became a joke, like, don't go to that doctor unless you want to get pregnant. And then it just kind of happened. And somewhere down the line, I had my own issue, and I went back to that. I said, well, I think
Mm.
I don't know what it is, but that's what I got to do to get pregnant, and it worked for me as well.
Wow.
So
Wow.
by the second time I tried to get pregnant, I did have a doctor, a friend of mine, and she said, she made the connection for me. She's like, it's insulin resistance. That's what it is. And I was like, oh, wow. And so then from then, of course, it was very clear, and it coincided with the time that I went back to Canada. I had my second child. I met Dr. Fung, and I started working with them. So it all
Wow.
came together.
Fascinating. So let's talk about PCOS. It's Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. Um, and they always say that insulin resistance is associated with it,
Mhm.
but actually it causes it. I mean, it's like a
I think
major
it's the root
trigger.
cause of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then when you so you got introduced to Jason Fung, and then I'm sure that at that point I would imagine that you started to implement a lot more intermittent fasting, or
I
maybe
had
not.
already started it. He was
Okay.
already very well known to me. Maybe not as well known as he is today, but enough that I had already been, quote unquote, stalking him.
Okay. Cool.
I knew enough about him. I had started fasting. I did start keto way before that, but I started fasting. Um, we were very interested in his work. My husband had already started looking into fasting. And actually my husband's very first fast was a super long fast. It was a 12-day fast. So we were
Wow.
very into it.
Wow.
And then I went to a conference and I knew some people in South Africa and they introduced me to him. And so it was, but I had already contacted him before. I was in Toronto and I wanted to work with him.
Awesome.
But, timing was off and so it all worked out.
So there's a lot of women now that are getting some ideas somewhere through the internet. I don't know what article they're reading, but women shouldn't do fasting because it's going to mess up their hormones. What's your take on that?
Well, most people that I've worked with over time, not because I wanted to be honest, this fertility thing, as I said, just kind of stumbled upon me. Mostly I worked with people with metabolic syndrome, right, in general. Right. But the reality is that most people that look for this kind of help or that go to a nutritionist are still women, and probably, perimenopausal or postmenopausal, around that is probably the highest percentage of people that search for people like me. Mm-hmm. And since I've been working with Megan and Jason, Megan and I worked very closely together in clinic. When I first started with them, I was in clinic with them because I was a naturopath. I could work in clinic and do clinical work, which is great. That's how I got my basis, right? And same with them. The majority of their patients are women. So right. Megan, and I'm going to leave this source here because way better than anything I can tell you is just to go to the source. She's got a series of blogs on women and fasting just because of this, of this. Good. And so if you go to idmprogram.com/blog and you search women and fasting, there's a series of blogs that Megan has written as a woman, number one. She's a young woman. She's in her mid-30s, but she's a woman nonetheless. And she has treated thousands of women. Adult women in all age groups. And so what she says, and I'm going to leave this out there for you, I know your listeners and the people that follow you are very informed people. And so it would be easy enough for them to understand this. But what she says is that every time she reads something about women that shouldn't be fasting, and then she goes and searches that person and their repertoire and their experience, mm-hmm. You just can't compare their experience to her experience. Right. I mean, she's been doing this for over 8 years, both personally and professionally. They have thousands of women that they have followed. So it's really a myth. I'm going to leave it out there.
I agree 100%. In fact, if you pull the string, a lot of times they say, well, I'm doing fasting and it's making my hormones worse. You find out it's like the 5 and 2. I said, oh, so you're basically 5 days out of the week, you're pretty much eating the normal whatever you want. And then 2 days you're doing a low calorie diet and you're
starving.
Yeah. And you first of all, you're not going to have a chance to adapt. Secondly, it's not the way to build fertility. I remember even when I was in practice, I was putting people on fasting, and I noticed it improved fertility. I remember one lady, she actually was scheduled to come in. She didn't come in. I called her up. I says, and her husband answered, says, oh yeah, I told my wife she can't come back to you. I said, why? Because she's getting worse. Oh yeah, after you're treating and she's getting worse, she's feeling sick. I'm like, oh wow, I'm sorry to hear that. 2 weeks later, they show up in my office. We're sorry. That was morning sickness. She got pregnant, and I'm like, you're welcome. So it does improve fertility because especially if you do it healthily. You're not just starving. You're having nutrient-dense foods and. But the main thing is the high insulin, what that does to a female's hormones and a male hormone. I mean, it's just messing everything up. So that's like when you talk about androgens, for example, I guess people actually automatically think, well, they can't seem to get their wits around how insulin can trigger androgens, but it does. Insulin resistance increases androgens. So.
Yeah, there's some great diagrams out there if you look it up. I mean, Dr. Fung and I are doing some work together on PCOS. It's something that's going to come out next year, but and so there's some significant research out there. I mean, for my friend in Mozambique in 20 whatever year it was, 2012, to say to me, what do you mean? It's insulin resistant. It was so obvious. She studied in, I think, Barcelona. I think that's where she did her she was like so obvious, like, right. And it really, if you look it up, insulin, we think of insulin and we think diabetes, right? We think insulin and we think obviously metabolic endocrine hormone, but it has major reproductive functions. And yes, it does affect both female women and men. And what you want to do is balance out that insulin. You can't have too little, but you can't have too much either. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do. And it is true that in the process, a lot of women feel like their cycles may get longer, may get shorter. I mean, it's still balancing out, right? There's a sort of balancing act that's going on there. And when insulin is leveled, then your reproductive hormones work out better. There's other things too. Mood, insulin affects mood because it affects the sympathetic nervous system. It has other functions, except that we all think of, or many people think of insulin as just being an endocrine or metabolic hormone, but it isn't.
No, it's actually one of the most, it's probably the most dominating hormone, because in the presence of too much insulin, you get a nullification of thyroid, all the growth hormone, testosterone. You have all these hormones that are just get nullified, especially when you're dealing with fat burning too. So it's, you can do all these great things. You could try to stimulate your thyroid hormones, your growth hormone, your anti-aging hormone. But if your insulin is too high, those things get nullified. You canceled out. You don't see the benefits. So yeah, it's I think it's just a matter of educating people on the truth of this. So, and then with fasting, you instantly have this additional benefit of repair action and genes that get turned on to start to repair all different parts of your body. So that's like huge. So the combination, and that's what I always recommend, if you were to do the keto, low carb, and then just eat constantly all day long, it's not going to help you. So you want to do both. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it.
Well, your opinion though is not just an opinion, of course. It's based on a lot of experience and seeing this firsthand. A lot of people are talking about keto or they're talking about fasting, but then as Megan says, if you go and look into their experience, they have no experience.
Right.
The subject matter. They're giving a lot of opinions,
right,
but they have no experience for whatever reason, whether because they just didn't want to get into it or because they read something a long time ago and they were just turned off by it. And so now they're just repeating what they've heard. But what experience do they have? Has any medical doctor or any health professional that's put people through a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting come out and say, oh no, I was wrong, it's caused them harm? I haven't seen that yet.
No one.
I have not seen that.
Absolutely not.
So.
Yeah, I mean, like, unless you're in practice and you work with real people over and over and over a period of years, you're not going to see this. Like, even with me, I didn't accept insurance, so it was all cash practice. So it forces you to, if people are going to pay you, you better get results or they're not coming around. So it forces you to take it to the next level where you're doing everything you can to research and figure things out, because unfortunately in school, like you said, I think I got 4.5 hours of nutrition.
Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't 3? Okay.
Yeah, it was just all the wrong information. I think there was a little nutrition class, and then it was a joke. And so you're graduating going, okay, how do I do this? So you just have to figure it out when you graduate. So there's not enough time to really learn everything while you're in school, because you just have to get through the tests. I mean, unfortunately, that's how it's rigged, So yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And really, I mean, as a naturopath, I look at my colleagues now. I don't practice as a naturopath anymore, only because I've moved out of Canada and now I'm in Portugal. I have to figure out getting a license here. I did get a license in Mozambique in about 6 months. Let's see how long it's going to take me here. I mean, I like to keep my license active. I do like to see people in clinic. So it's something that I'll probably look into. But since I've been working with IDM, it's going to be 3 years coming up very shortly. The first 2 years I was in clinic, but during that time, we already had this online program. So you get to speak with a lot of people all over the world, which is wonderful. And for me, that's really all I want to do. I consider myself a dietary educator. I don't necessarily work as a naturopath, so it doesn't matter to me whether I have a naturopathic license or not, because naturopaths
Mhm.
tend to do many other things. They're
Right.
in Ontario specifically, they're considered primary healthcare providers. So this is in Canada, in the province where Dr. Fung and Megan are at. So I was actually supposed to be following people as a primary healthcare provider, but that's not really what I do. I provide dietary education. And so I help people, as you said, with low carb diets and intermittent fasting. And I can do that anywhere. Online works out really well,
Yeah.
especially because people need constant support when they're starting out. They have questions. They want to be able to, call you. And so this is the program that Megan and Dr. Fung have set up.
I think that's smart. You're going to reach more people, and you
Right.
don't, with the internet, you eliminated space. So you can pretty much contact anyone, anywhere, without having to drive there or travel or anything like that. It's so nice. And I'm sure, I don't know if this happens with you, but you have someone that might need some help, and they start presenting all their symptoms and everything. And it really comes back down to, okay, well, let's first make sure you're doing the basics, okay? Boom, boom, boom. And usually they're not. You get them doing the basics, nothing fancy, and they start seeing amazing results. So that's one of the things that frustrated me because I didn't do enough education in my clinic. So they were constantly just dependent on, Dr. Berg, what do I do for this? What do I do for that? And now it's what I'm doing videos, put them out there. This is how you get the basics in there. And then the amount of results, and you don't have to necessarily treat every single symptom, because it gets better by getting in these basic, really vital key things, which I think if they were implemented, it would just, create a huge dent into all these problems now, and the drugs and everything. It's just insane. I mean, just the simple thing of cutting your carbs down, fasting, those two things right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to handle so many issues.
Yeah. And it sounds, today when we tell people, well, let's do some fasting or let's cut your carbs, people
Yeah.
get, unless they come to you, right? Once they've already done their own sort of processing and journey and they come to you and they're ready, beautiful. It works out really well. It's simple. This is what Dr. Fung is always saying. It's simple. It's free. Fasting is super easy once you exercise that muscle. Of course, when I'm talking about fasting, there's many different schedules for many different people, and you can start with the basics, which is just cutting out snacks, for example. This is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then, all the other intermittent fasting schedule and protocols can be implemented over time, depending on people's comfort level, depending on their goals, etc. But when you tell somebody who's totally not ready or hasn't been properly educated, they think you're completely nuts. And
Right.
it's so funny because just this weekend, or I guess today's Saturday, but just yesterday, it was a holiday here on Thursday. So for me, this is a long weekend. But I was looking at the history of sort of the Canadian dietary guidelines.
Mm.
And because it's the same as everywhere else in the world, right? The dietary guidelines are very similar all over, and they've been influenced by a whole bunch of stuff. But I wanted to see what did it look like before, the famous 1982 sort of guidelines that came in that started all this craziness that we're now kind of having to deal with. And I found this awesome little thing. It's called food. It wasn't a guideline, but it was like a food, what you should eat basically for Canadians in 1949. And they had breakfast and they had some instructions, basic stuff. It was like an egg and bread. Yes, they did eat carbs. It's not that people didn't eat carbs, but if you look at this, just this basic, it was a breakfast with an egg, and it was a slice of toast, I think, with butter, and it was a cereal with milk. That was breakfast. And it said it's lunch or dinner. So they were assuming that people weren't having a whole bunch of meals, which I think for me, this doesn't shock me, because I always use the example of Mozambique. People in Mozambique, not in the city, but in the country, still live a very rural, obviously, life. And they live off the land. Okay. They don't have money to go to grocery stores and buy stuff. So they live off the land. They buy basic things. There's basically 2 or 3 things that they buy a month, and then the rest of the stuff they grow. And they have 1 or 2 meals. Simple. And
Wow.
I think people think of fasting as this, like, oh my gosh, craziness.
Yeah.
But not too long ago, people were having 2, maybe 3 meals, and that was it. And that was normal. No snacks. Snacking was completely ridiculous. There was no packaged stuff anyway. You know, most of the time people just didn't, they lived off of normal stuff. You know, they did have bread, they did have rice, they had potatoes. Potatoes was on this guideline. I think it was pretty important back in 1949 in Canada, but it was within their meals. And Dr. Fung talks about this all the time. You know, every culture does have a staple, you know, like in parts of Africa, it's sweet potato, or it's cassava, which is a root, whatever. And in Asia, we all know they eat a lot of rice. It's within their meals. The main thing there is that they were eating main meals, not snacking. So they're eating 2-3 meals a day. What's happening now with your patients and my clients, Dr. Berg, is that they're already insulin resistant. They already have metabolic syndrome. So now we're not talking about healthy diet. Now we're talking about therapeutic eating or therapeutic fasting, right? Because now you're trying to help somebody reverse a situation that's been caused by eating too often. So now you need to eat less often. Right.
Yeah, our bodies were developed tens of thousands of years to not eat. That's how, you know, we're specialists at starving and surviving under conditions where there's not a lot of food. That's in our DNA. And we do very well with that. We're really good at storing fat. We can store an unlimited amount of energy. And that came from that environment. But now, I know it's hard to believe, but you can actually call someone and order food delivered to you, already cooked within a half hour. That's incredible. It's amazing. I know.
You guys have Uber Eats? We have Uber Eats.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
I didn't realize Uber Eats even existed until I moved to Portugal. I'm sure they have it in Canada, but I didn't know. So there you go.
It's like you can get food instantly, because I got to eat every hour and a half. I just have to constantly eat. Yeah. It's a situation. It's terrible. Well, I'm really excited to have you come to our summit. Have you ever been to Washington, D.C.?
I don't think that I have. No, not Washington. I do have a very good friend that lives in Washington. You'd think I would have gone sooner, but I'm so excited.
Oh, you're going to love it. You're actually going to be in Maryland, but it's right over the border. But it's just a gorgeous place. It'll be at the Gaylord Hotel, which is a hotel that I always wanted to do an event at, or a seminar. We're doing our second one. It is just simply gorgeous. It's massive, and there'll be the coolest people that you've ever met will fly in there. And these are people just watching us on YouTube, and they're going to come, and they're all just very enthusiastic, and we'll have a blast. Some great speakers, and you're going to be talking about PCOS in detail, but making it simple for people to get. So it's going to be exciting.
I'm super excited. I loved your YouTube video. There's a proper name for it, but your launch video, it's beautiful. It's super. It made me really excited to think about being part of it.
Oh, great. Yeah, I had Jared, who basically is a guy that's never been trained on video. He just watched YouTube videos. He learned how to edit. He does all my, he's my videographer. He does all my video and editing, and he just did an incredible job of putting it together. The difference between last year and this year is we're shooting for 1,000 people. So it's going to be double the size. So it's just a bunch of really amazing people that just love the information, and we're going to have a really good time. So those of you that are watching, it's a mandatory seminar. You have to come.
That's awesome.
So I'll put a link down below so you could actually check it out. But we're already filling up pretty fast. And so those of people that are sitting on the edge, don't wait too long, because I would hate to have you go, oh, we're booked. We can't fit anyone else in the room, because you have to book these a year in advance, by the way.
And this is what's happening to many of the low carb conferences that we've been going to, right? Like before it was like, a couple dozen people maybe, then it was 100, 200. Now we're seeing close to 1,000 people. And then it's, a month before or so, we're saying there's no more spots. And we've got a whole bunch of people that are desperately trying to get a spot, but you can't, right? You just can't magically create more room and more spot. And it's happening, which is a good sign. There's a whole bunch of doctors that come to these things, because doctors, of course, do want to make a difference. It's not that they don't, right? But they want to learn. And then there's a whole bunch of people, either people that have been affected by this personally and just really want to continue to be a part of it, or people that are learning about it. So it is true what you're saying. I think if people are interested in coming to this one specifically, I'm saying that just based on experience for my own clients, because I know I had a lot of people really disappointed that they weren't able to go to past ones.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.